right. Cool. I don't have a clicker, do I? Do I have to push the button every time? I guess I should have gotten that earlier. Okay. Well, nice to be here. I'm very happy to meet all of you. And what I'm going to do today is give you a little more information about Marketplace Ministries. I know I can tell all of you are very educated in missions here already, and you've had some wonderful colleagues of mine have been here to speak. So I'm going to give you a little information, then I'm going to tell you some stories of how I have been a Marketplace missionary or minister, and what that looks like, and then answer any questions that you might have after that. So is that all right? Sound okay? Okay. So first of all, as Mark, I was going to call you Fritz, but yeah. As Mark Fritz said, I was born in Vietnam. My first language was Vietnamese. I grew up in a small village. My parents were CMA missionaries there during the war. And I understand that my mother wrote a book, which is in your library. So sometime if you see My Vietnam in there, that's about my upbringing. We lived there almost until the end of the war, and then we moved to Malaysia. And Malaysia is where I graduated from high school, at Dalat School, which was a CMA school for missionaries' children at that time. Malaysia, and Penang specifically, is a very cosmopolitan city. There are 1/3 of Penang is Malaysians, 1/3 are Chinese, and 1/3 are Indian. So it's a very mixture of people in the city that I grew up in, and we celebrated all the different holidays, and I got to see quite a lot of different cultures. And for some reason, I don't know why, I was really attracted to the Chinese culture, and I thought, I would love to be a missionary in China. Well, of course, at that time, it was still communist, and it was socialist communist, and it was not open to people, let alone missionaries. It was not open to foreigners. So I thought, well, I put that in the back of my head, and I thought, someday I can be a missionary to China. When I was at Nyack, I heard a chapel one time. I don't remember who was speaking, but I heard for the first time about tent making. They called it tent making because Paul in the Bible supported his missionary journeys by making tents. So it was his occupation that brought him the ability to travel and the money to support his missionary journeys. So in the same way, I thought, that's perfect for me, because I can get a job, some kind of job, where I can go to China, and I can go in that, whatever job that is, whatever occupation it is, and then be a missionary in China on the job. One thing, people often call Marketplace business as mission. I would rather call it occupation as mission, because we have a lot of people who aren't in business. They're nurses, or they're farmers, or they're something else. They're not all in business. But basically, Marketplace is the area of the CMA that I was attracted to. I wanted to stay in the CMA. I was brought up in the CMA. I love the Alliance. I knew many people in the Alliance, and I wanted to be a part of a mission organization. I didn't want to go by myself to China and have no accountability, no relationships, no vision, about what God is doing in that huge country. And so I joined what at that time was called International Fellowship of Alliance Professionals. That's a big word. We used to call it IFAP, IFAP. This was the precursor to what is now Marketplace Ministries. And I joined it because it was an association. It's not employees. These are not CMA employees. Our Marketplace people are not employees of the Alliance. They are employees of some other organization. Like for me, I was an employee of Coca-Cola for many years. I worked for schools. I worked for different companies, and I was their employer. but I was part of an association which was under the Alliance, and that allowed me to go to field forums. I went to Bible studies with the other missionaries in my city. I babysat kids of missionaries when I was younger. Really got to know the mission family and felt like a part of what God was doing through the CNMA, wherever city I was living in. Again, the emphasis still is on creative access countries. So we are trying to move into countries where the gospel is not there. India is a big one. India is now the largest, most populous country in the world, and it will just continue to increase like that, and we cannot go as missionaries to India. There are very, very few Christians in India, and very few churches, and very little gospel presence in a country of many, many people groups. Indonesia is another one. Very hard to go to Indonesia. Now, we do have missionaries there, but the wide part of Indonesia really doesn't like missionaries. It's harder and harder to get visas. China is another one. It's become more closed than ever. 10 or 15 years ago, when they had the Beijing Olympics, the 2008, they had the Olympics in Beijing, it was more open. They were starting to open up to foreigners and foreign workers, and I worked in China for many, many years, and I felt welcome. Now I no longer feel welcome there. They don't welcome foreigners, not just whites, but even Singaporeans, Koreans. They don't want foreigners. They have become very nationalistic, and it's hard to get visas. It's hard to get jobs now, and fortunately, the church in China is very strong. You've probably heard that. It's probably one of the largest churches in the world now, but it's still hard to go to unreached people groups that are in China, which there are many. So, and the Arab world, I lived for a while in the United Arab Emirates. I lived in Iraq. You can't really proselytize in these countries. You can't witness. You can answer questions, but you can't be a witness. And even churches are very hard to start. You have to go be underground unless you register your church with the government. So currently we have 150 professionals in marketplace ministries, and they are in 39 countries. One of the countries that we're really interested in moving into now is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is starting to open up more and more to foreigners. They need a lot of help from professionals, particularly in construction, for example. They're building major cities and major ports and all kinds of things in that country, and they are open to foreign workers coming in there and working. And we're hoping to send some nurses and some construction workers very shortly to Saudi Arabia. Now, I've had a variety of jobs. I didn't know you were going to get this pamphlet, but if you look at this pamphlet, there's such a variety of jobs, isn't there? Aren't there? There's teachers, there's consulting, martial arts. There's a martial arts studio, a factory, engineering, aquaponics. There's such a variety, which I really like in Marketplace. And I even have had a variety. I started in Tianjin, China, which was at that time the third largest city. It was small at that time, only 20 million people. Now it's 35 million. So it was a huge city for me to go into. I didn't know any Christians. I didn't know of any church. And I went there to work for a trading company for a while. I worked in the hotel development industry in Hong Kong and the Philippines, selling hotels. I worked in a private investment company in Hanoi. In the early 90s, when the Soviet Union kind of broke up, Soviet Union was Vietnam's only friend. So Vietnam said, we are going to have to open up. They saw China opening up and becoming socialist economy and a market economy. They said, we have to do that. We are poor. We are not competitive. All these countries around us are starting to overtake us. We're going to have to open up. So they started to open up. Guess who speaks Vietnamese from when I was a child? I got an opportunity to move to Hanoi in the early 90s, and I'll tell you a story about that in a little bit. I worked in human resources management for a variety of companies and conglomerates. I worked in the airlines. I was the head of HR for Cathay Pacific Airways. I was the head of HR for Asia for Coca-Cola. Then I became the global head of talent for Coke, working in Atlanta, their corporate headquarters, and then they moved me to Bangkok. I worked for a Thai family-owned retail company, and they moved me to Milan because they bought the biggest retail operations in Italy, Germany, and Denmark. So I'm working for a Thai company that's buying European companies, and the middleman for all these cultures that are so different from each other. Then I moved to Dubai, and I worked for a semi-government company that is Emirati. That means from the United Arab Emirates. Emirati people are the people that the emirs and the Emirates, the people that live in the Emirates. And this was an Emirati company that they managed the port of Dubai. Then they decided to buy 60 ports and terminals around the world, and they needed an HR person to come in and set up their international human resources system in five continents. And so I flew around a lot, but it was a good job, a great job, until COVID hit. And then I was in Brazil, at a port in Brazil, when COVID came, and they shut down Dubai without telling anyone. And I ended up spending a couple months in Brazil in a hotel that emptied out because all the COVID came to Brazil. And so I was the only resident of a Marriott hotel for 3 months on the most beautiful beach in the world, Ipanema. And nobody cleaned my room, but I could move to a different room every day. And they would come in the morning and take my order for lunch and dinner, and then somebody would come and make it and then deliver it to the club floor. They said, "You can stay in the club floor," because there's nobody in the hotel. So I sat in the club floor. It was actually creepy and lonely. After a couple of weeks, I'm trying to work from there, and I never made it back to Dubai because Dubai didn't open up. So I decided to move to Hong Kong, and long story, but I ended up back in Hong Kong. I then ended up in Beirut, and I was working with Kama there. I was helping. There was a huge explosion in the city of Beirut, and so Kama, who you heard about last week, I believe, was really helping people in Beirut to rebuild their homes. And if they would allow Kama to help, or the church in Beirut to help them rebuild their homes, all they had to do was listen to a devotional on WhatsApp every week. And they were, of course, willing to do that. And there was a wonderful ministry through that many of the Islamic people in Beirut said, even our own imams and our own Muslim leaders are not helping us. Why is the church helping us? And there was a wonderful ministry there. The country then collapsed, and we ran out of electricity and gas. And one of the organizations I was working with asked me to move to Iraq, Kurdistan. And I went there for 6 months to teach and to run an English language training center in Zakho, Kurdistan. So I've also had a lot of variety, which I really like. I love that in Marketplace there's a lot of variety to use skills and abilities. I feel I was very fortunate to be in human resources because that's industry agnostic. I can work for any kind of industry if I'm in human resources because everybody has it, even the CNMA now. And I was able to go to different countries and different cultures. I did learn a lot of languages, in case you're wondering. And so that was... Was that a stone? No. Try and failure and... Try and fail. No, fortunately, I'm an extrovert, and I don't care to look stupid. You have to. You just have to go out and try it. And I became quite good at Asian languages. I realized later that Asian languages are very similar to each other grammatically. And they're very, very, very simple grammatically because they all come from the Chinese characters. And so if you're writing characters, you have to simplify the language as much as you can. That's why when Asian people learn English, they often say things like, tomorrow I go store, yesterday I go store, because they don't have tenses, they don't have masculine and feminine words, and it's relatively easy. Now, the tones are hard, but if you can pick up the tones, you can kind of learn the language. And I learned Mandarin. Vietnamese is my first language. Mandarin is quite similar grammatically. It may be like learning Italian and French, say. It's not as close as Spanish, but the roots are kind of the same. And then I learned Cantonese, and then I learned Thai. And they are all originally from the Chinese. So grammatically simple. Arabic was another story, because they conjugate the beginning and the end of a word according to the gender of the object or the subject. And it's a nightmare, yeah. So I studied Arabic for 2 years. I still can't really talk. I can read and write, but I can't converse very well. So also a variety of jobs, as I said. There's also a variety of support systems in the Alliance. Okay, some marketplace ministries are fully supported by themselves. Like I said, I worked for Coca-Cola. There are some people that work for a secular company, wherever they're at, and they totally support themselves. Others are fully supported by the Great Commission Fund, or they raise their own support fully, often through churches like here, and through the Great Commission Fund as well. And then there's everything in between. Some are partially funded, and also the CMA does give some support, for example, benefits and insurance. So if you're out in a country, what's hard is that because of the places that we go, it's hard to be profitable. Okay, I might run a company here in America, and I might be very good at it, and I might make money. I think, I'm going to take that company, and I'm going to do this in West Africa. Well, you're probably not going to make money for many years, if ever. So you kind of have to have some support, especially if you hire staff and if you're starting to, kind of run a company. Similarly with India. India, it's just hard to be profitable in a country that doesn't have a market necessarily for what you're trying to sell or what you're trying to build. So there's different variety of support systems, and there's a variety of ministry opportunities. In some countries that I was in, there was an international church, which was wonderful for me because I could get involved as a worship leader. I could get involved in Bible study fellowship. I could get involved with other international people from around the world that were in that international church. In some cities, we didn't have any international church, but there was a local church. And depending on the country, you were allowed or not allowed to go to a local church. I had to be very careful in Vietnam to go to the local church. I was told by the secret police that were not very secret that I should not get involved in the local church. So I attended, but I started to work with their choir, for example, and I was starting to go on Wednesday nights and help them with the discipleship and training their leaders, their pastors, and I was told by the government, you shouldn't do that. So I had to pull back in that case. So, but in some countries, there is a local church. In Dubai, there's no local church. There are no local Christians at all. And so there's a variety. There's an underground church in some of the countries. So China has a very big underground church, and it has a government-registered church. And it's very difficult. You have to be very wise and discerning on whether you should go to an underground church, because if you're caught, it's not only trouble for you, but you can make trouble for the people in the church. And so you have to kind of ask. You have to kind of take some time in the country to kind of figure out, what church is what, and kind of ask the local people, like, will I get you in trouble do you mind if I come, or should I not come? Those kind of things. And some underground churches are very vocal and it depends on the city that you're in and the local police and whether or not they're harassing churches or not. It's very complicated. And there's also the situation where the underground church doesn't like the registered church, because they say, you guys have conformed, like you've what's the word? Kind of sold out, or you've compromised. You've compromised, and you're being a registered church. But the registered church says, but we worship the Lord, and we're legal, and you're illegal. So if you're persecuted, that's because you're illegal. So it's not easy, and there's a lot of kind of trickiness in underground church. There's parachurch. I've worked for several Christian organizations in the cities that I've been in that are doing Bible translation. They're doing radio ministry. Some that are doing teaching English, like Christian university teachers in different universities, and various partnering that you can do. I like what Mark Fritz said earlier, that this is the Alliance's biggest hidden secret. And it's a shame that it is, because we really need more people that have skills and that have careers and that have jobs, capabilities to join Marketplace Ministries. It is the biggest opportunity for missions in the world today. More and more of the world is closed to the gospel. More and more of the world is in what we call the global south, which is like India and Indonesia and some of these southern Africa and a lot of these areas that we can't send missionaries to. We have to be sending even Access now. You've heard about Access, right? Even Access is sending Marketplace people. So, like am I allowed to say on here?
Yeah, Steve.
Okay. We're in countries like Kyrgyzstan. We can't send missionaries to Kyrgyzstan. We are sending Marketplace people. They have to have jobs. They have to go with jobs to be able to go there. And this is happening more and more, because the countries that are unreached that the CMA, the Alliance, wants to go to are countries that aren't really taking missionaries. Saudi Arabia, I told you about. India is a really big push for us. We want people to go there, but we can't unless we take advantage of strategies of putting Marketplace people in there. And just a couple of thoughts about Marketplace that I want to share with you. First of all, our workplace is our mission field. I have a lot of people asking me, how do you have time for missions if you're working for a company? It's a valid question, right? Some people think, I'm just getting a job so I can go into a country, and I don't have to be good at that job. It's just getting me a visa, and then on the side, I can do my real missions work. Okay? I don't believe that at all. God calls all of us, including you, to be a missionary. Go and make disciples wherever you are and in your job. And our job in Marketplace, our career, is our mission field. It's not just a platform. And we need to be the best workers we can be for the glory of God. We can't be shoddy workers. That is not a testimony at all. Our work is our worship to God and our way of attracting people. Why are you different? Why are you here in my country? Why are you loving us? Why did you give up this career and a lot of money wherever you were and come here where you're not even profitable just to serve us and to work with us? That is our mission field. First of all, is our work, our workplace. Secondly, having said that, if the situation allows, we can be involved in other mission work. And there are opportunities, as I was saying before, depends on the situation, the job that you have. I told you I worked for a consulting company for a little while. I did hotel and development consulting. I had a lot more free time. I also set up my own consulting company for a couple of years. I had much more flexibility with my time, and I could travel into different places and do training and do discipleship and work with churches. But other times, working for Coca-Cola, I can't just say, I'm taking off because I'm going to go and, go to a baptism in something. I mean, you have rules and regulations with a multinational like that. And thirdly, some places, what I just said, some workplaces have greater opportunity for reaching people for Christ than others. That doesn't make them better or worse. For example, I think the best way to bring believers into the kingdom is by being a teacher in China. As a teacher, you're living with the people day in and day out. They're curious. Not just China. Wherever you are in the world, a teacher is a wonderful, wonderful way to share your life with people. Often you're in a dormitory. It might be a special foreigners dormitory, but you're still in the dorm system. You're sharing your life with people very openly. Even through your teaching, you can weave in cultural aspects and religious aspects at Christmas time, Easter, etc. It's such a great way. And when I was in Kurdistan teaching, just had dozens and dozens of opportunities to share my faith with people. They're curious. The curriculum was very open to sharing about words and, cultural words and what do you believe and that kind of thing. And as opposed to working for a secular company, it's very hard. I didn't have as many opportunities at Coca-Cola until I got into leadership development. And then leadership development is all about building character and building the person, right? It's not building management skills. It's helping you build your character as a leader. And so I got the opportunity to take groups of leaders out into the countryside. I've been to Mongolia, dog sledding. I've been to West China, in a tent and horseback riding. And then sitting around a fire at night with Chinese leaders and talking about, what do you think about leadership? What do you want with your life? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? What are your hopes and dreams? They've never been asked that in their life. Never. Most Chinese, especially, are from a single child family, so they don't even have brothers and sisters that they share with. Their parents have had huge expectations on them their whole life and never asked them what they feel like or what they want to do. They don't go to camps and Beulah Beach camp, and they don't do things like that. So they have never been asked before, what do you want? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? How do you want to be remembered? How do you want other people to view you? What kind of inspiring leader do you want to be? Never. And it's an opportunity for them, just gingerly, they start to open up. They start to share their strengths and weaknesses with each other, and they start to coach each other, and it's a beautiful thing to see them just blossom and become, confident and leaders. Always through that, I can share with them very openly what I believe, how Jesus was a model of leadership, how they can have hope in him in the future, how he can help them through situations, etc. And they'll often, can you come pray with us, pray for us And many, many people have come to the Lord through these kinds of settings. So a lot of variety. Some years I often would, every year we have to write a report for Marketplace, on how was that year, what did you achieve, what are some of your goals, who do you want to minister to. Some years I was so depressed, I thought, wow, I got to share with one person and they were rejected, Other years I was like, well, 150 people, you know what I mean? So you don't know what seeds you're planting for other people to harvest either. And it's just God asks us to be faithful and to be obedient. And He'll take care of the rest. So again, why Marketplace? Why would I join Marketplace? Well, first of all, for being a part of something greater. As I said, I wanted to be part of something that I could contribute to a mission organization and to a team of people. I didn't want to be out on my own. Fellowship, of course. It was wonderful to fellowship with the other missionaries and other international workers that were in my neighborhood, in my area. Accountability. I'm still single. I've been single this whole time. And accountability is very important. Nobody knows where I am. I could be, honestly, nobody knows where I am.
I was wondering when you were globetrotting.
Yeah. It'd be very easy, very tempting a lot of times. Very temptations come up a lot. And if you're not plugged into a church, into a discipleship, into accountability group, it's very hard to maintain your relationship with Jesus. And many times, as I said, I was in a city of 20 million people for 2 years, never met another Christian person. So even working there, I was asking around, is there a church? I'm sure there were, but I could never find them. And so you really need, accountability and fellowship in times like that. And I wanted to use my gifts and talents in serving the Lord in the service of all of Jesus for all the world. I'm going to tell you a little story. When I went to Vietnam, I told you I was in China first, and then Vietnam started to open up, and I thought this is a great opportunity. And I got a job with an American company that was an investment company. And these very, very wealthy Americans, in fact, you had to have $1 billion before you could even join the club of Americans, decided to invest in Vietnam early on so that they thought that they could make billions out of that investment. So it was a club that was put together by a particular man in Washington, D.C. So they hired me, first of all, just to open their offices for them. In Vietnam at that time, you couldn't just start doing business. You had to open a representative office. So they hired me. I was very young. I think I was 25, maybe. And a lot of young people at that time, this is what they did. Like companies would hire some young person just to go in there and open their offices and get things going for them. So I loved it. I moved to Hanoi, and I had to look for an office for this company. And at that time, there were no office buildings. But there are a lot of French villas, because it's very French. Hanoi was built by the French mostly, and it's beautiful French villas on leafy streets. And most companies would buy a villa, and then the bottom floor would be their offices and things like that, a little kitchen and offices. And then the top floor, they would turn into their home. So people would live upstairs. And so that's what I went to look for. Well, you couldn't just hire any villa. The owner of the villa had to have a permit to rent to a foreigner. So how do you find this? We didn't have internet at that time. And it was like, how can I find a villa that has a permit to rent to a foreigner? So I looked a lot. I walked the streets. I would knock on doors, and very hard to find. Well, one night, I had a friend visiting. He was with the Navigators, and we decided to do a prayer walk. So we were walking around several blocks, and I saw this villa, but it was a weird villa. It was like pie-shaped, and it was in between two villas, and it was more modern. So somebody had built that more recently and wedged it in between two villas. So I thought, let's go. That's weird. So we went there and we knocked on the door, and this old man came out in his pajama bottoms, because the Vietnamese at that time, they just wear half pajamas, and they tuck it in. It looks like a diaper. So he came out in his diaper, nothing else, no shirt, nothing. His hair was all over. And he spoke to us in French. And we're like, oh, no parley, no French. So then he tried Russian. And we're like, no, we don't speak Russian. But we're impressed that you speak both of those. And then so he switched to English. And we're like, wow, you speak all those. And he said, we said, do you have a permit to rent to foreigners? And he said, yes, come in. So he said, well, the Japanese I've already been negotiating with the Japanese. They want to rent this villa. But I would rather rent to Americans. So if you want it, and we negotiated a price. I couldn't pay that. But he said, well, I'll think about it. And so he decided he would rent this house to us. What I didn't know was that this house was very long, and the front part was the only part we saw. The back part was another house, and that was his also. So when I moved in, he just moved in the back and was more than my neighbor. He was like my housemate, basically, he and his family. But they had a back entrance. So they were there all the time. But I thought, this is great. The Lord has done this for us. And so I moved. I had been living in a little guest house, and I came out to move. On the day I was moving into this house, then he moved in the back. He was moving with his wife and 2 kids into the back part. So he was moving his furniture out, and I was moving my furniture in. And the police came. The police came regularly, but this day they came with sheets of aluminum siding, like aluminum walls, thin aluminum strips. And I had a chain link fence on both sides of my lot. And they were nailing this aluminum sheeting to both sides of my fences. And I was like, what are you doing? And they're like, no. I'm like, what are you doing? No. Like, what are they doing? So I went to ask Mr. High. Mr. High was the man with the diaper, and he had a diaper that day as well. I said, Mr. High, what's happening? The police are here, and they're putting up this aluminum sheeting. He said, oh yeah, they don't want you to see who's next door, who's coming and going at the house next door. I said, what's the house next door? He said, it's the house of the vice president. I said, of what? He said, Vietnam. And it's my sister. I said, that's your sister? The vice president? He said, yes. And my brother lives behind, and he's the minister of trade. And my other brother is the minister of science and technology, and he lives in that one behind. So God had set me right in the middle of all these ministers and the vice president. And I said, what's on the other side? And he said, that's the embassy of Iraq. And we had just started the Gulf War. And so I became friends with this man that was the ambassador from Iraq, because we could speak in Vietnamese. I didn't speak Arabic at that time. He didn't speak English. So we would talk in Vietnamese, and I would be like, oh, sorry, we bombed you today. And he's like, it was the weirdest relationship. And then I had the vice president on the other side. So and she started she would invite me at Lunar New Year, which they call Tet. They would invite me back to have like seeds and candies, and we would sit on the floor, all in their diapers. We would sit there, and I'm like, here's the vice president, the minister of trade, the minister of, and we're just all having candy together. It was just the most bizarre thing. After a couple weeks, she came over, and she said, would you apply for a satellite dish on your roof? I was like, okay, why? And she said, well, Vietnamese at that time were not allowed to have a satellite dish because they didn't want Vietnamese to know what was going on like outside of Vietnam. But foreign companies are. So if you apply for one, I don't want to take advantage of my position as the vice president. It doesn't look good. But if you get one, I'll splice into yours and and I can watch CNN and stuff from my TV. And I said, I don't really know how to do that. And she said, no, my brother's the Minister of Science and Technology. He'll do it for you. I was like, oh, okay. So I applied, and within the afternoon, they were there on my roof, like setting up this satellite dish. And then sure enough, the Minister of Science and Technology was up there in his diaper on the roof, and he attached it not only to hers, but to his and to his brothers and to the Embassy of Iraq. And so I had the one satellite dish in the area that everybody was into. But at that time, you had to turn the satellite to meet you had to turn the dish to meet the appropriate satellite. So I had a dial in my house that had like 5, and I had to put tape on it. Like 1 was CNN, 2 was BBC, 3 was like HBO, 4 was something else. So I would be watching movies at night, and I would forget to turn it back. And in the morning, she wanted to watch CNN. She had to come to my house and ask me, turn the dial, So I would be in meetings. Remember, my bottom floor was meeting rooms, and I was meeting with government people about the projects that were starting to happen in Vietnam that I was responsible for. And she would stick her head in and like that, and I would be like, okay. And I would go and turn the dial for her. And the people in the room were like, was that Madam Vice President? And I would say, yeah, she just comes over and borrows eggs and sugar from me. But we struck up a very good relationship with her, and her grandson lived with her. She had a son who was a bit of a playboy, and he had a son out of wedlock, and that little boy lived with his grandma, the vice president, and she was afraid that he would be kidnapped and things, so she would never take him out. But she didn't mind if I would take him out on my motorbike and take him to the park and things like that. So I got to help raise this young man who now is a leader in the country of Vietnam many, many years later. And that was really neat. She was also very, very, very famous because she was a war hero, which means she shot a lot of Americans, I'm afraid to say. But she was a war hero, and she was a contemporary of Ho Chi Minh. So she went with Ho Chi Minh to the Paris peace talks, and she knew French, and she was very involved in the country. So she was very, very famous. A little while later, I started a church in my home. We had some Christians by then that had moved there to Hanoi, and we wanted to have church together. And so as we were meeting in different homes, they asked me if I would apply to have an international church and if I would have the church in my home. A lot of the other Christians were with charities or other non-government organizations like World Relief or World Vision, and they still were suspicious. The government was still suspicious of non-government organizations. But I worked for a very famous company by then. We were the biggest American company in Vietnam at the time. I met with the Prime Minister every month because he wanted to make sure our projects were large and they were American, so he wanted them to keep moving. And so I had relationships already with the vice president, with various ministers of trade that lived around me. And so we decided that I would have it in my home, and it would be the most safe. So the church started to grow, and we had probably 35 or 40 people on a Sunday morning. And then one Sunday, the secret police came again, and they said, you can't meet together like regularly on a Sunday. Like, everybody knows you're meeting together. It's too dangerous, and somebody could throw a grenade in here. But that was their excuse. So they said, you can't meet together. And so I'll hurry this along. So I went to my landlord and I said, Mr. High, the police said we can't meet here. What do you suggest? And he said, I suggest you talk to my sister, because the Ministry of Religious Affairs is under the vice president. So I went over and I talked to Madam Bin, was her name, and I said, what do you suggest I do? And she said, you need to apply to the government for a license to have an international church. And you need to move out of your house. Like, you need to rent an office building or something that they're not using on Sunday. And then it just looks bad if you're meeting in a home. It's suspicious looking. So I went back to the church leaders and I said, we need to move into an office building. So we found one very quickly. And I went around on my motorbike to all the embassies, and I put up a poster that we were meeting in this building on Sunday, whatever that Sunday was, and if you want to come, we have an international church. The first Sunday, we had 120 people, because all of the Koreans and Singaporeans and Filipinos, Christians, felt safer meeting in an office building with other international people than meeting in a home. And from then on, the church kept growing and growing, and we were up to about 300 when I left Vietnam. So another long story, I had resigned from my company and I was moving to Hong Kong, and the church asked me before I moved, we still don't have a license. Can you go back to the vice president and ask her if we can get a license before you leave? Because once you leave, we don't have that relationship anymore. So I went and met with Madam Vice President. I said, Madam Vice President, we still don't have a license for our church. What do you suggest? And she said this. She said, don't ask for one. Like, don't keep asking. She said, you have applied. If you insist on an answer, the answer will be no. So don't ask anymore. If somebody asks you, just tell them you applied, but just keep meeting together and don't insist on an answer. So I said, okay. So I went back to the church and told them that, and they kept meeting together, and they have met until now. Now the church has over 1,000. It has 3 campuses in Hanoi, and they are doing so much amazing things for the city. About 6 years ago, they had the 30th anniversary, and so they invited me to come and speak as the founder of this church, and they asked me to come speak at the anniversary party. And it was amazing because they had the whole police force there. They had the whole Communist Party of the city of Hanoi, front rows, and they had hundreds and hundreds of people from all over the world to celebrate. And the pastor asked me if I would share that story of how this was founded in Vietnamese for all the police and everything. And so I shared with them in Vietnamese. I said, this is what happened. And I asked Madam Bin, and she was still alive. She was no longer the vice president, but she's still alive, and she's still the most famous woman in the country. So I asked Madam Bin, what I should do, and she said, just keep meeting together and don't insist on an answer. And today, 30 years later, we still don't have a permit. And everyone laughed, including the Vietnamese. They were like, that's the way we do things here in Vietnam. And I'm very excited to say about a year later, they got their permit. So they are a licensed international church in Hanoi called Hanoi International Fellowship. And when Hanoi Hanoi is now building a new metropolis, a new city center, and smack in the middle of the city center is a place for Hanoi International Fellowship. They wanted the church to be the center of that community, which is amazing. The police did that. The government did that. And because of all the good things that church has done for that city over the years. So, I hope it's an example to you of, I just went there to work. I wasn't trying to set up a church or anything, but in my work, the Lord brought relationships into my life that most people could never have. And that became suddenly the person of all the people in Vietnam, the person who had the right to make decisions about religious affairs. And my mother also came one time to visit, and she wanted to meet, the vice president wanted to meet my mother. And we took her a Vietnamese Bible, and we stood there in her living room, and she said, "Oh, this is the most precious gift." She said, "When I was a child, I went to a Catholic school in Cambodia. Our parents sent me and my brothers to a Catholic school, so I know what it means to be a Christian." And my mother said, "Do you know what you need to do to be saved?" And she said, "I know." I don't know if she was saved, but she knew what it was to be saved. So just through working and through living my life in that country, the Lord was able to use me in ways I never could have imagined. 2 minutes over. All right. So, yeah.
I've got a question. When you
Please.
were in Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
were you near the DMZ? Were you in Cam Ranh Bay, Bambi Tuet? Where were you?
As a child, we started in Quang Ngai.
Okay.
Quang Ngai is south of Da Nang, but it was more dangerous than Da Nang because Da Nang was a place that was the biggest U.S. military R&R spot.
Right.
Da Nang is the third largest city in Vietnam, and at that time was the busiest airport in the world because of all the Air Force and all that, and Marines and everything. So Da Nang was safe, but the Viet Cong would go around Da Nang and come down to our city. And I remember as a child many dead people on the side of the road, barbed wire everywhere. We couldn't go into a lot of villages; it was not safe. We had a pickup, kind of like a pickup truck, and we had planks in the back because most of the bridges were blown out. So my dad would go out to villages to preach, and we would come to a thing. My mother would stand out there. He would put down planks, and my mother would be like this, like, "Ooh!" To go across planks. And, just...
Ho Chi Minh is communist now. Am I right?
The person?
No, Ho Chi Minh.
The city?
Yeah, they're communist, right?
Well, they're socialist. So what happened was the North Vietnam was fighting South Vietnam.
That's right.
And the U.S. backed the South. Ho Chi Minh used to be called Saigon. That's where I was born. And we lived in Quang Ngai in the South. Everybody lived in the South. There were no foreigners in the North, except Russians maybe.
Okay.
And then we moved to Da Nang. When our house was destroyed in the Tet Offensive of 1968, we moved to Da Nang. And we were then in Da Nang until the end of the war.
Weren't you afraid to be when they had that offense? You were there?
Well,
Weren't you afraid to be there?
the church told us to go away.
Right.
Like it's weird because they're South Vietnamese. They have relatives in the north.
Right.
They knew when people were going to come.
Right.
And they told us it's not safe. Go down to Saigon. So my mother took me down to Saigon. I was 2 in 68.
Okay.
Took me down to Saigon. We had a big guest house there. We had more missionaries there than anywhere. And the CMA we had probably 100 families in Vietnam. And the CMA told the families, "We advise you to leave the country. We can't do anything for you if you are captured or kidnapped. And we advise you to leave." Not one left. this is the opportunity for the harvest. I mean, millions of people were moving from the countryside into Da Nang and setting up refugee camps in the city of Vietnamese refugees from the countryside. And my parents were out there every day doing the Jesus video, sharing, my mom was a nurse, so they were really helping to, there were burn victims, there were people with missing limbs, it was awful. But everybody was scared of death. What a great time to be a missionary. I mean, nobody left, and there was a huge harvest. And there was a lot of pressure for the CMA to build a strong national church because we knew we had to leave. So in a way, it still to this day is a model for the world of how to do missions. And I don't know if it would have been like that if we wouldn't have had that time pressure to build our pastors. It now is the largest CMA church in the world, maybe the second. I think Congo is the biggest, or I'm not sure. But there's 1 million Christians.
Where is that located?
What?
Hanoi, that church.
It's not one church. It's the church body. The Vietnamese Alliance is twice as big as the U.S. Alliance.
Well, our military could not determine who was north and who was
Of course,
south.
they look the same. Yeah.
That's right.
It was an awful war. I can't imagine trying to be there and seeing young ladies and, oh, how cute, and they throw a bomb at you. I mean, you don't know who's north and who's south, and there's no difference. I can't tell the difference unless they talk, then I can tell.
We have time for one more
Yeah.
question.
Sorry.
We'll stay afterwards. No.
Sure.
One more question? Well, I shut that off. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.